I would like to stress once again that the Commission will take deliberate action when the spirit and letter of the directive is not upheld.